Premium Vietnamese Arabica, inside the Lat Highlands. Why altitude changes taste. Morning fog rolls slowly over steep green hills. Coffee cherries glow red against dark leaves. At over 1,500 meters above sea level, a single farm produces beans sold for prices rivaling luxury wine. What grows slower here tastes brighter. What yields less is worth more. This is coffee shaped by altitude, patience, and thin mountain air. Vietnam is one of the world's largest coffee producers, supplying cafes, factories, and retail shelves across every continent. Most of that volume is fast-growing Robusta. But hidden in the highlands is a smaller, quieter industry. Arabica from the Lat feeds specialty roasters, premium blends, and export markets that demand consistency and traceability. Few consumers ever see where these beans come from, or how much control is required before a single cup is brewed. The Lat Highlands rise quietly above Vietnam's central plateau, far removed from the heat and humidity that define most of the country's coffee regions. Elevation here ranges from 1,400 to over 1,600 meters, pushing Arabica trees into an environment of thin air, cooler temperatures, and slower biological rhythms. Daytime warmth rarely becomes extreme, while nights drop sharply, forcing the plant to conserve energy and extend its ripening cycle. Rain arrives in clear seasonal patterns, saturating the soil during growth and retreating just as harvest approaches, reducing mold risk and stabilizing sugar development. Beneath the surface lies volcanic basalt soil, dark and porous, rich in potassium and trace minerals, capable of draining excess water while retaining enough moisture to prevent stress. Sloped terrain prevents stagnation, allowing roots to breathe and water to flow naturally downhill. These combined conditions are rare and fragile. They cannot be manufactured, accelerated, or scaled horizontally. Arabica exists here because the land slows everything down, and in coffee, slowness becomes flavor. Arabica coffee is fragile by design. It grows slower than Robusta. It produces fewer cherries. It reacts sharply to temperature, sunlight, and stress. At high altitude, slower metabolism allows sugars and acids to develop more fully inside the bean. Cell structure becomes denser. Flavor compounds concentrate. The result is higher acidity, layered sweetness, and cleaner aroma. These traits create demand. They also create risk. A small change in climate or handling can erase value overnight. Production begins with seed selection. Farmers choose Arabica varieties suited to altitude and disease resistance, often Typica or bourbon derivatives adapted locally. Seedlings are raised in shaded nurseries, monitored daily for moisture and root health. Early mistakes cannot be corrected later. Weak genetics mean uneven ripening. Poor root formation limits nutrient uptake for years. Each plant represents a long-term investment, often taking 3 years before producing its first commercial harvest. Life on an Arabica farm in the Lat Highlands follows a slow, repetitive rhythm dictated by altitude rather than machinery. Coffee trees are planted with deliberate spacing along steep slopes, each row aligned to balance sunlight exposure and airflow while preventing erosion during heavy rains. Shade trees rise above the coffee canopy, filtering harsh midday sun and stabilizing temperature swings that would otherwise stress the plants. Growth unfolds over months, not weeks. Flowering arrives suddenly after the first seasonal rains, covering hillsides in white blossoms for just a few days before fading. From that moment, every cherry develops at its own pace, requiring constant observation. Workers move through the fields daily, pruning branches to control yield, removing diseased leaves, and adjusting organic inputs based on soil condition and leaf color. Irrigation systems assist during dry stretches, but water use is carefully rationed to avoid shallow root systems. Labor is continuous and manual, shaped by terrain that limits heavy equipment. Slopes restrict vehicle access, forcing most tasks to be done on foot. Risk is ever present. Excess rain can trigger fungal outbreaks. Unexpected heat can accelerate ripening unevenly. Wind can strip blossoms before fruit sets. Machines support transport and monitoring, but decision-making remains human, based on experience passed down through seasons. In these highlands, coffee is not pushed to grow faster. It is allowed to grow correctly, one cycle at a time. Modern farms integrate sensors to track soil moisture and canopy temperature. Weather stations predict flowering windows and disease pressure. GPS mapping standardizes plot performance. Small-scale processing equipment reduces post-harvest delay. These tools do not replace labor. They reduce variability. Yield may not increase dramatically, but consistency improves. Losses shrink. Quality becomes predictable enough for global buyers who demand the same cup profile every year. Harvest season in the Lat Highlands marks the most critical transition from agriculture to quality control. Once coffee cherries are collected, the real race begins inside the processing stations. Within hours, the fruit is stripped away to expose the coffee seeds, the raw green beans that will ultimately define flavor and value. Speed matters. Delays trigger fermentation defects that permanently alter taste. Mechanical pulpier separate skin and pulp with calibrated pressure to avoid cracking the beans. Water channels carry the seeds forward, washing away residual sugars while density sorting removes underdeveloped or damaged beans. Temperature is kept stable. Flow is constant. Human hands intervene only where machines cannot detect subtle defects. The exposed coffee beans are then dried slowly under controlled airflow until moisture levels fall into a narrow acceptable range. Too fast and internal structure fractures. Too slow and mold develops. Every movement is deliberate. Every minute is measured. At this stage, the coffee is no longer a fruit. It is a seed carrying the chemical blueprint of aroma, acidity, and sweetness. What happens here cannot be fixed later. Once drying is complete, the coffee beans enter the industrial phase where consistency replaces intuition. The beans move through hulling machines that remove the final parchment layer, revealing clean green coffee ready for grating. Optical sorters scan every bean at high speed, ejecting defects based on color, size, and surface integrity. Gravity tables separate by density, ensuring only structurally sound beans continue forward. From here, batches are sealed into food-grade bags designed to block moisture, oxygen, and light. Each lot is coded, traced, and logged. Inside warehouses near Lat, temperature and humidity remain tightly controlled to prevent aging before export. Trucks descend mountain roads toward coastal ports, carrying containers bound for roasting hubs across Asia, Europe, and North America. Transit time is calculated down to days. Too long and freshness fades. Too fast and handling risks increase. By the time these green beans reach global buyers, they are no longer anonymous agricultural goods. They are standardized inputs for specialty roasters, contract brands, and international blends. The journey from highland farm to global market is invisible to consumers, but every step determines whether Vietnamese Arabica arrives as a premium ingredient or a forgotten commodity. At the market level, Vietnamese Arabica occupies a narrow but increasingly valuable position. While Vietnam dominates global volume through Robusta, Arabica from the Lat Highlands trades on a different scale. Green beans from high-altitude farms routinely sell at a premium compared to lowland coffee, often reaching prices 2 to 3 times higher depending on grade and contract. For local growers, this shift transforms land economics. A hectare planted with quality Arabica generates significantly more revenue than traditional crops, while requiring fewer harvest cycles per year. Exporters benefit from long-term supply agreements with specialty roasters who prioritize consistency over volume. At the global level, these beans enter a value chain where margins expand downstream. What begins as a green bean sold by the kilogram becomes roasted coffee, branded products, and café beverages priced by the cup. In this system, altitude-driven quality allows Vietnamese Arabica to compete not on scale, but on differentiation. The result is a smaller output with disproportionately higher economic impact, reshaping how value is measured within Vietnam's coffee sector. As demand for high-altitude Arabica grows, pressure quietly builds beneath the surface. Forest edges retreat to make room for new plantings. Water use increases during dry seasons when competition between agriculture and local communities intensifies. Chemical inputs promise higher yields but risk long-term soil fatigue if mismanaged. Shade-grown systems preserve biodiversity yet produce less volume, forcing farmers to choose between ecological balance and short-term income. Certification programs promise transparency, but compliance costs can exclude smallholders. Climate variability adds another layer of uncertainty, as rising temperatures slowly push suitable Arabica zones higher each decade. The system delivers premium coffee to global markets, but it also raises unresolved questions. How much growth can these highlands sustain? Who carries the cost of maintaining quality as conditions shift? And can a product defined by altitude survive in a warming world without losing the very traits that make it valuable? As the cycle resets in the Lat Highlands, warehouses quiet down and green coffee beans rest in sealed bags, waiting for their next transformation. Months from now, they will be roasted, ground, brewed, and consumed far from the mountains where their chemistry was shaped. Yet nothing added later can replace what altitude, climate, and time have already written into each bean. Acidity, aroma, structure. These qualities are locked in long before heat ever touches them. The question that remains is simple but unresolved. As demand rises and conditions change, how long can these highland systems continue to produce beans that taste like this? And what will the future of specialty coffee depend on next? If you want to keep exploring the hidden systems behind the foods and materials we consume every day, consider subscribing, and join us for the next journey inside modern agriculture.